Hello, good morning, and welcome. It's Thursday, March the 20th. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
We really do believe in that mantra of giving you everything. So as part of that, a reminder, it's the monthly Bank of England interest rate decision today at midday. They're expected to hold rates at 4.5% and reiterate that they're going to be taking a cautious approach to further cuts, which isn't what the government wants to hear. There are two big speeches today. David Lammy, Foreign Secretary at the Chambers of Commerce Conference, and Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, is back at the Institute for Government, again talking about government waste. All over the papers today, regular listeners won't at all be surprised. They're rolling out the carpet for a spending squeeze next week, the spring statement on Wednesday. But you'll know about that already because you listen to this podcast. And finally, Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, is abroad again at the European Conference of Presidents of Parliaments, which will quite frankly annoy some papers who will be telling us the cost of that trip before long, I am sure.
He does like to travel, doesn't he? But we're going to start with the Tory local elections launched today ahead of the vote on May the 1st. And Kemi Badenoch is in Buckinghamshire for her launch mid-morning. She'll be giving a speech and taking questions. Over 1,600 seats up for grabs, not just a test of how badly Labour and the Tories could suffer, but also whether Nigel Farage can convert Reform's very high polling into actual bums on council seats. We have one Tory party official telling my colleague Dan Bloom that it's going to be catastrophic and predicting that the party could lose hundreds of seats compared to 2021. So the question is that just expectation management? And if Conservatives actually get a bit of a bump and a revival, we'll cheer a bit loud, or is it really going to be as bad as the managed expectations reckon?
Basically, my mantra when it comes to local election anticipation and trying to guess what's going to happen in local elections is when all the parties agree a result is likely, then that's the outcome to sort of start reporting around. It's a really interesting week for the Tories. I feel like the Kemi Badenoch's party's gone up a gear this week. The biggest policy announcement that Kemi Badenoch has made to date has come out this week, which is her announcement to abandon, if they get into power, the 2050 target date to get down to net zero emissions. Funnily enough, there's a story in The Sun today, political editor Harry Cole, a tale which I think in another context, in another universe, some people might, maybe even Harry Cole in a former life, might have labelled Project Fear, an absolute classic of the genre, and it's all about the costs of net zero. He's got hold of a government document, official sensitive government document, that shows the potential risks of the 2050 target. This document claims it could wipe 10% off GDP and have all sorts of impacts on the market. I'm mentioning this in the context of Kemi Badenoch and the Tories because while it's invidious to guess anybody's sources of any story, it is being pointed out by some this morning that this leaked document was produced by the Business and Trade Department in November 2023, which was at that point run by one Kemi Badenoch, who was the business secretary. And this story leads perfectly into her agenda at this point. And this is a good point, I think, to leap off the discussion about exactly what's going on with the Tories at the moment, because as you say, that there is a worry that the Tories do badly in this election. But every time Kemi Badenoch's party stumbles, there is a discussion about whether or not there's going to end up being some kind of deal or pact or non-aggression arrangement with Reform, with Nigel Farage's party, something that Kemi Badenoch repeatedly, including the Telegraph this week, rejects. However, this is sort of where I've landed on this. One of the things that's going on is that Kemi Badenoch, bit by bit, is stripping out policy differences that the Tories have with reform. So that is true at the moment of net zero. They are now not identical to reform on this because they still say they believe in man-made climate change and tackling it. But the big difference between the environmental position and reforms is the gap has closed enormously. There's every expectation that the European Convention of Human Rights is no longer something that the Tories believe in once Robert Jenrick has completed that bit of the review. And in the end, I do wonder if Kemi Badenoch's party and Nigel Farage's party have, to all intents and purposes, the same policy agenda, whether that doesn't make it much, much, much easier for there to be arrangements and pacts when it comes to the next general election. What is going to be the big point of difference between those two parties? What do you think of that, Anne?
Well, let me try and help you out there because I did go along to that Kemi Badenoch event in a very sort of business-friendly environment she was basically on a kill mission on net zero. But as you're suggesting, the terms in which she does so and the purpose of that, beyond just disagreeing with it as a policy, are important, aren't they? Because that will make the difference, I suppose. And is she really targeting people in reform who just have a full-throated ideological resistance to this, or can she make something of it in her own way? And it was interesting to me that she was really pushing this idea that this is about a kind of pragmatic, pro-business case. But there is a bit of a tension there. If you have a party to your right, which can make more noise, which can bang every drum and play all ends, I was would say play all ends of the piano. Well, that's a nice mixed metaphor for this time in the morning. If you are then a bit stuck saying, well, I'm against net zero, but I'm not as ideological about it as Nigel Farage, it can end up as a bit of a muddled message. And I think this is a sign, as you are indicating, that there is a bit of a tension there in how far you merge ideas and ideology with reform, but then say, yeah, but I'm just a bit more a little bit more kind of sotto voce about it, or do you then end up giving more attention to Nigel Farage? And that seems to have also happened with this spat about I'm a celebrity. Nigel, we were waiting for this moment. We knew it was going to come probably. Nigel Farage, I'm a celebrity, very well known, of course, for that appearance. And that then created a bit of a spat with Kemi Badenoch, saying this was a sign of a kind of triviality, if you like, of the Farage celebrity bandwagon. Then he shot back in the Telegraph, most members of the public have no opinion of Kemi Badenoch, and he prescribed a spell on the TV show as the perfect remedy, saying he would give her some tips if she wanted to sign up. I suppose that is quite an interesting jibe, isn't it, to say you're not a celebrity. Very few voters, other than those who've already got strong Tory leanings, know who you are.
Yeah, there is no doubt that the penetration that Nigel Farage has amongst the British public is phenomenal. People bring him up when you're all over the country. And Kemi Badenoch's attempt to tackle that it has been to sort of slightly belittle that. There's a theme. There's a theme that ties across that discussion on net zero and this, which is Kemi Badenoch's basically sort of saying, "Look, I'm the grown up here." But in my experience, whichever politician is trying to pretend that they're more grown up than the next one is often losing the argument. When Theresa May just said, I don't understand these opposition, I'm the grown up here. Or when Rishi Sunak did that. Or when Gordon Brown did that after Tony Blair. Believing that you're the more sensible person than your opponent often means that you are blind to the reasons why the other person or your opponents are increasingly popular. And it's a bit of a blind spot.
It's a bit lofty, isn't it? I agree with that. It's just a phrase that sort of begins to grate. The grown up in the room, and people sort of like, well, actually, the children seem to be having more fun.
I certainly have more fun. But then take it back to the net zero discussion. I think the Tory high command think they've come up with a clever position, which is just to take the date out. And so they can have it both ways. But the bottom line is that what the public will hear is Tories pulling away from a climate change target. And there is no way on earth that Kemi Badenoch is going to go around for the next 3 years explaining why we still do need climate change measures, right? She's not going to defend the controversial bit of her policy which is why, I mean, this is why this attack that Kemi Badenoch is a bit too much of a think tanker and not enough of a political leader. This sort of, I've got a complicated, nuanced position on this issue. Why can't you understand that I'm just sort of smarter than everybody else? I think there is a massive danger that gets lost in the hurly-burly and the noise, and the public just doesn't hear it.
I guess just to put in a word for her point of view, having been in that room, I think it was very much, Sam, shaped by having a quite business and finance friendly setting to say, this is what is driving me on this issue. It wasn't held in a think tank, which it kind of could have been. And I think that was the aim. Now, I'm sure you're right. Because you're Sam, you're probably right that this may be a nuance too far, but I don't think they haven't thought of that. What they're saying is, look, what Kemi is saying is, you Labour, you keep claiming to be business friendly, but look at all these people who either are or have been quite big fish in the city and in business who are really scared about this net zero policy. I think that's why it was framed as it was.
We will see.
You don't sound very convinced.
Well, I mean, those that were aware that Kemi Badenoch gave a big speech on Tuesday, and there aren't many of them because she did it on the same day as the massive welfare proposals by the government, won't have known that she was surrounding herself by business people. So I totally take your point. It's just nobody knew that either. And she does have to communicate the points she wants to get across. And there is a sort of haughtiness to the way that they approach communication. There's a bit of an attitude problem, I think, with the media, from sort of the way that I certainly think some colleagues feel that they get treated. So, it's a two-way street. If you want your message out, you're going to have to try a bit harder, and that just is where we are. Right, while we're on the subject of lecture over. While we're on the subject of electioneering, look, you'll remember at the start of the year, there was talk of Elon Musk giving some mega donation to reform, and that danger might have ebbed from the Tory point of view. But Sky News, one of my colleagues, Serena Buck, saying, understands that ministers are drawing up plans to restrict foreign donations from foreign donors giving unlimited funds to UK political parties, and could do so within months. I thought the easiest thing to do was to get Serena to explain it. Here she is.
Essentially, there is what the government call a loophole in the law around foreign donors, which is they're not allowed to donate to political parties, but if they donate to a UK company, even if that company doesn't make any money, then that company can make donations on their behalf, and that's how they get around it. Now, the UK company will be limited in how much they can donate by potentially the share of their profits. So if you look at X, for example, formerly Twitter, Elon Musk's company, that didn't register any UK profits. So he won't be able to use his company X or the UK branch of that to donate. He will have to find another way to give funds to reform if he still wants to donate to their party.
That was Serena Barker Singh talking about possible changes to electoral law to restrict donations. And this is a tricky one. I hear in Labour circles both sides of the argument. First of all, some who think action must be taken, the idea of foreign money in huge sums coming over and kind of changing the nature of our politics, particularly in an era where you could spend lots of money on social media and then your message reaches the public. It's a big, big problem. But there are others who think you can't change the rules of the game halfway through a parliament. And frankly, all parties have relied on foreign donors using UK companies to give money. Where do you think this goes?
Yeah, I thought it sort of solved a question in my mind, really, when we were talking about that moment when it looked like Elon Musk, whether he is now or not, as I think is a bit more dubious, whether he was going to make some major donation to reform in the UK and the terms on which that would happen or would be allowed. So I thought it was a very very good point there that your colleague was exploring. My only thought is that if you are in a position to set up companies in the UK, and part of the reasoning for that is you might want to donate, it's not too difficult to arrange to turn a small profit in the UK. So I thought that was very good, Sarita, to point that out. You could change that rule, but would it actually change the outcome if someone is determined to donate? It's pretty easy within the compact of the way that you set up companies, if you are at that level in a business, to do so. I would have thought it's always worth if you like, turning the screws on funding a bit, because it's a bit like water in an old building. The funding does find a way through systems. And it's always good just to be keeping an eye out for that. Not because I think it's particularly effective, Sam, for the reason that we've just touched on, but because I think it keeps it in the public mind. And that's fair enough. I think we do deserve to have it a bit in the limelight, because otherwise we do find that money is flowing into our systems at a time of, when one might also ask questions about that without perhaps people being as aware of it as they should be.
Yeah, no, one worry from a Labour official was that if you do this, it takes primary legislation, and primary legislation takes a year or two, and you'll probably just attract quite a lot of these foreign donations while the legislation's going through, but before it's been implemented, and you'll get a glut of foreign money just before royal assent, and it'll all be very counterproductive. Anyway, I think the theme of this morning really is that there are, if you're Kemi, if you're Keir, there is sort of difficulties on all sides and revolts on all sides. I mean, we really are in an era of perpetual revolts. It's just a feature of the system. Now, serendipity means you have a bit more on that, Anne, that you want to say?
Yes, my Politico colleague Pat Baker at the Westminster Insider podcast has a deep dive into parliamentary rebellions and the dark arts of how the whips quell them. Topical, no? And it's just quite fun bits about how whips have gone at this over the years. And apparently Tony Blair used to call rebels the little darlings when he was talking to his chief whip, Hilary Armstrong. There's quite a lot of little darlings in the mix these days, aren't there? It also has, and this is also news to my co-host, a cameo featuring one Sam Coates in 2013 at the time of what, Sam? What was going on? What rebellion?
So there was a rebellion about the Syria intervention. Remember, there was a proposal by Barack Obama that David Cameron was jumping on the back of, potentially to launch airstrikes against Bashar al-Assad. In the end, a vote in Parliament put paid to that. There was a big Tory rebellion. It often gets presented as Labour stopping that. It was a big Tory rebellion. And I was talking to the rebels then about how they were going to organise that rebellion.
It's quite a funny story. I'm just grab the mic back from Sam and say it's quite a funny story about when you meet Sam Coates and there's a rebellion brewing. Let's just say the rebellion gets a bit bigger as a result of one conversation. But I don't want to give too much away. It's a great story on the podcast there.
Listen to the podcast, but there is a reader cost with today, because the point about the Syria intervention, the reason it fell flat from the point of view of many of the MPs that opposed it was there wasn't a clear mission. And there wasn't a clear mission before we started engaging in combat in field. And that, Anne, in the last couple of minutes of this podcast, takes us neatly to all of the issues around Ukraine, right? It's a foreign, Keir Starmer's having a foreign policy day. He's up in Barrow this morning. He'll be meeting people from the coalition, the winning military planners later today, when military planners have a meeting chaired by John Healey, the Defence Secretary, to work out what kind of assets might be deployed in Ukraine. We've got a continually evolving situation. Donald Trump overnight saying that the US businesses might take over the power plants in Ukraine. You've got Keir Starmer making arguments about why defence spending increases will help UK citizens, UK growth, but fundamental elements of what we're going to do in Ukraine remain incredibly murky. But Keir Starmer very keen to kind of put on those civvies and walk up and down defence assets as he is now the securocrat Prime Minister.
This is a big theme, isn't it? And Downing Street releasing pictures of Keir Starmer and John Healey striding atop a Vanguard-class sub off the coast of Scotland. There are good reasons to do so in terms of getting that message out that the UK is full square behind Ukraine and a big player on European security. But it is also not exactly unhelpful to Labour when so much else is a real problem for the Prime Minister and for his agenda, to be saying we are the party of defence and keeping it that absolutely in the public mind. So this morning, the PM will be laying the keel, as I now discover it is called, of the first boat of the next generation class of ballistic missile subs. So we are fully back. I can't help but think back to those images of Margaret Thatcher sitting atop tanks. It will not be long, I think, till we see Keir Starmer. There'll probably be a tank will be poised outside number 10 in the heart of Whitehall to remind us that he, as he wants us to see it, is the Prime Minister of Defence. John Healey there, very much his second in command as the Defence Secretary.
There's a lovely line from Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogrom, two of the chroniclers of Keir Starmer's premiership. Apparently his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, saw a front page on the Daily Mail, typically hostile, which had a picture of Keir Starmer visiting Barrow Shipyard. And apparently Morgan McSweeney's verdict was, if I could marry a front page, it would be this one. That's the kind of thing he really likes. Right, if I could marry a podcast, it would be this one. We've had the alarm, so we're going to have to say goodbye. I don't know how you're going to cope until Monday and without me, but that's the last one of the week. I hope you have a lovely weekend, and I will see you at the start of the new week.
Incurable romantic, some Kates, marrying the podcast. See you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
The world is becoming increasingly complex and volatile. How can we make sense of it all?
I'm Richard Engel.
And I'm Yalda Hakim.
And we present Sky News' latest podcast, The World. Each week, we'll cut through the noise to guide you through the week's global events and explain to you why what happens out there matters to you wherever you are.
We're on the ground in some of the world's toughest places. Listen now to The World with Richard Engel and me, Yalda Hakim, wherever you get your podcasts.